Just about 27 minutes after the hour, it's a Winsome Wednesday. And I know you're used to us hosting Robbie on a Thursday or a Friday, but traditionally, Preserving Bible Times has always appeared with us on a Wednesday. That goes way back to, about 2014 with Doug Greenwald. Pastor Robbie Pruitt, Anglican pastor, lives and has his church in Virginia. He is the executive director of Preserving Bible Times. I just got your newsletter, the copy of Between the Lines, on the Sacred Thread.
That's right. Yeah.
That's quite a production. I've already watched the first installment, and we should tell people about that. That's
Absolutely.
That's Angel Studios and Walking the Text got together to do a series. This is the season one. Now, you may be familiar with Angel already because you can get that channel on Roku or other streaming services. But this is a partnership with Walking the Text. The first series is on the Lord's Prayer, and that first episode was just stunning.
Absolutely. So Brad Gray from Walking the Text put that together with Brad Nelson and the team over at Walking the Text with Ignite Studios and in partnership with Angel. And Angel is actually offering the Lord's Prayer, Sacred Thread, Part 1, Season 1, all 7 episodes for free today. So we push that with Preserving Bible Times. You can link over to the Sacred Thread and watch that, or go to Angel Studios, and they're offering that for free.
I was so impressed with that, and I'd like to pass along my story to listeners this morning because our cowboy church, Soldiers of the Cross Cowboy Fellowship, it's called. It's part of a nationwide network of cowboy churches. Is just turning its attention just now to biblical context. And they've had me present a number of videos, Brad Gray videos, which I've done, and they're saying, give us more, give us more. So I see this series, The Sacred Thread, come along, and this would be perfect for Wednesday night Bible study if I can get permission to do it. Because this free opportunity is a limited time. I don't know how limited that is. But I'm in charge of Bible study on the 13th of May. I'd sure love to present episode 1, which covers just the first 2 words of the Lord's Prayer, Our Father. And if we all remember that the roots of our Christian faith go back to Judaism 2,000, 3,000, 3,500 years ago, you got to understand that the term Our Father is much more complex in their culture than it is in ours, and we tend to get it wrong.
Absolutely. And I highly recommend folks to subscribe to Angel. You can subscribe to it just like any other streaming platform at Angel Studios, or just go over this week in particular. I know it's free today, all 7 episodes. They just released episode 7 this week, and that concludes the series. And I love it that they labeled it season 1, which implies there may be further seasons. So diving into other contextual topics. And so I'm kind of waiting on edge for that to come out, because there's got to be an announcement out there somewhere. But our friends over at
I even learned that there really are burning bushes in the Negev.
Yeah. It's actually the desert air, the dryness and the wind and the static electricity. And so the issue is not that there are burning bushes. There are burning bushes everywhere. The issue is it was not consumed. Exactly. That was the miracle.
Yeah. So, and if you get the Between the Lines Preserving Bible Times newsletter, you've got a link there where you can go ahead and watch all 7 episodes. If not, I don't. You could go to Angel Studios. You go to Walking the Text, and I'm sure you could find a link or find more information about getting this for your home TV. And I'm trying to get it for our church Bible study. I'll see if I can get permission to do that.
Yeah, go over to thesacredthread.com, and it's free now, and it's for use for anyone. And if it's not available for free by the time you get to your Bible study, or anyone else that's listening or watching this podcast, go ahead and subscribe to Angel Studios, and you'll have access to
that. Yeah. But if you want to play it for your church, it's good to get permission. But right now, you can show it for family and friends, and my church are my friends. So
there you go.
I'll take that as legal permission. Robbie, we've got Pentecost coming up in late May. We've just gotten through Easter. Are we done with Eastertide?
No, we're in it.
In the middle of Eastertide.
We're in the middle of it. So yeah, there's 50 days from Easter to Pentecost, and we're going into the fifth Sunday of Easter. So last Sunday was the fourth Sunday of Easter, and that's called Good Shepherd Sunday. So you mentioned the burning bush, and that intros the shepherding topics. Because in that Lord's Prayer video, the intro, they did interview, Brad Gray interviewed a shepherd, a Bedouin shepherd out in the desert, and they talked about burning bushes.
Among other things, that was one
Among
small
other
part of it.
things.
I don't want
Yeah.
to do a spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert.
But you want to watch now. Each of those episodes of the Sacred Thread runs just under half an hour.
Yeah.
So set aside some time, and you and your family can get together in front of the TV and watch each episode during this limited time period. It's called the Sacred Thread, and the first season has to do with the Lord's Prayer. By the way, Brad Gray and Brad Nelson together authored a book.
Yeah.
On the Lord's Prayer. Bobby, you sent a copy of that to me. That's fascinating all by itself. So,
and there's a movie based on that as well. It's the abridged version of the 7 episodes of the Sacred Thread. They've abridged it to a movie called The Lord's Prayer. You can watch that on Angel Studios or wherever you stream videos. I think it's on Prime Video as well. But yeah, I highly encourage folks to read the book, The Lord's Prayer, from Walking the Text. Brad Gray and Brad Nelson co-authored that book. And then watch the movie, and then watch the 7 episodes of the Sacred Thread. You can get that over the sacredthread.com.
Connect the idea of the burning bush with shepherding.
Yeah.
There's
so
a very
Moses
firm connection. Tell us about that.
Yeah, Abraham was a shepherd. Moses was a shepherd. Jacob was a shepherd.
The people forget that 40 years of his life after leaving Egypt, being kicked out of Egypt as a fugitive, spent 40 years in the desert before the burning bush episode.
Right.
So he knew sheep, and he knew the lay of the land in the desert area. That was Midian, that's just north of Egypt, just across into the Negev. And he became a survivalist. I mean, surviving in the desert. How better equipped could he have been to take the Israelites into the desert and preserve that culture for 40 years?
And that's the thing about shepherding. Shepherding is a training ground for leadership. That's why pastors are called shepherds or pastors. It comes from this shepherding image of a good shepherd shepherding sheep. And so we're to shepherd the flock given to our care, as Peter said. And so pastors are shepherds, and leaders are shepherds. There's this whole trend of shepherd leadership where you study sheep and shepherding and learn leadership skills. God's training ground for delivering the people out of slavery in Egypt to the promised land. He used Moses and trained Moses up as a shepherd under his father-in-law in the wilderness, in the desert. So that's where Moses saw the burning bush, saw that it was not consumed, went to go explore this. Why isn't this bush burning? Heard the voice of God saying, I am who I am. He says, go tell Pharaoh to let my people go. So Moses is learning how to lead. He's learning how to shepherd people by shepherding sheep.
Well, he learned a lesson from his father, and I'm struggling here remembering his father's name in Midian.
Jethro.
Jethro came to Moses in the desert with the Israelites and said, Moses, you've taken on too much. You can't manage 1 million people by yourself. Bring in leaders to help you. And that was the origination of the 70, which a long time later became the Sanhedrin in temple times. So,
and also, this is why Jesus sends out 70 or the 72, depending on which gospel translation you're reading. But
every time you see a number in the Bible, it has a history to it, has a reason for being that number. Yeah.
Right. So that connection in Luke's gospel, I believe it's 72, and then the other gospels it's 70, but it's a hearkening back to Jethro saying, hey, you need to delegate authority. You need to have under shepherds. And so shepherding in the Bible is essential. I mean, David was the great king of the united monarchy, and David was a shepherd. You remember David had his brothers, and Samuel went to the house of David looking for this king that God said, I want you to anoint a king of Israel. And all the brothers went by, and Samuel realized God's chosen leaders not here, and asked David's father, do you have any other sons? And he says, yes, the youngest, and he's out shepherding the sheep. And he said, that's my guy. Go get him. And even David cited his shepherding and shepherding leadership with Goliath when he said, you uncircumcised Philistine, I killed the lion, I killed the bear, and now I'm going to kill you. And so David used his shepherding skills to take a sling and kill Goliath. And he learned that tending his father's sheep.
And I've seen a picture of slings and the stones that were manufactured for slings. And we're not talking about little pebbles here. We're talking about tennis ball sized rocks that later, and it originated with David. I'm not sure what he had and how he dealt with Goliath, if he had those, but he was with an army that would have been prepared with slings of their own. So his using a sling as a weapon was not unusual.
Right.
But doesn't that say he picked up 3 rocks from the ground?
Yeah. And some people say that was one for Goliath and the other for his brothers, just in case. So again, prepare well. And so there's a preparation, lesson there. But yeah, we have these sling stones are actually in the archaeological record. If you go to the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C., where I love to hang out, there you can see sling stones in the archaeological record. The Israeli Antiquities Authority has some on display, and the People in the Land Gallery on floor 5, their Museum of the Bible. So these are shepherding tools. And I love what Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book about the life of David and Goliath. And he contextually breaks it down. He actually assumes that Goliath has a vision problem because of him being a giant. He tells David, do you come at me with sticks? He sees sticks with this sling. He might also see a club in David's hand. Remember, David writes Psalm 23, and he says, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. So it could be very well that David does have sticks with him. Goliath, with his bad eyesight, might see, quote, sticks, but what he's really seeing is a shepherd's crook and a rod. So an offensive and defensive weaponry, and this sling, which would have been just hanging there, not being spun as David approaches Goliath. And so he could see it as sticks with his bad eyesight. So Malcolm Gladwell, an unlikely source of biblical context, but he does a great job breaking down David and Goliath.
There's another part of that story that often gets overlooked, and that's the fact that David kept Goliath's sword.
Yes.
Now, the Philistines had iron technology. The Israelites did not. That put the Israelites at a distinct disadvantage in warfare with the Philistines. So now David has that sword, and he marveled at it. It was a big sword because it was a big guy. He wound up spending time in Gath in the Philistine country, learning iron technology for 5 years as he was running from King Saul, hiding and he brought that back to Israel, which is why you don't hear anything more about the Philistines after David becomes king.
He reverse engineers that steel making technology.
He did.
And that sword of Goliath is also, when David is fleeing from Saul, that sword is kept in the tabernacle. Mm-hmm. And when David is fed by the priest, when he's on the run, the priest give David Goliath's sword, David and his mighty men. And remember that all of these priests are killed by Saul, and they're slaughtered. And Jesus cites this as a good thing that these priests gave David and his mighty men the showbread when Jesus was feeding his disciples on the Sabbath day. So all of these things are linked with David shepherding sheep, the tabernacle, the sword of Goliath.
From shepherd to king.
Yes, from shepherd to king. And I would encourage your listeners or those who are watching this video podcast, go over to our YouTube channel. And if you're watching this on our YouTube channel, there's some videos by our founder, Doug Greenwald, on sheepology. And so Walking the Text, before it was Walking the Text, did the Institute of Biblical Context, which turned into the IBC, the Infusion Bible Conference. And they did a whole series, a weekend conference on sheep and shepherding. We have some of our founders' videos up on our YouTube channel now on sheep and shepherding, and you can view them right there in our video collection under Doug Greenwald.
Mm-hmm. And I think those are available for free, aren't they?
Absolutely. Yeah, they sure are.
Okay. That's another thing. Robbie, the executive director of Preserving Bible Times, the website is preservingbibletime.org. Now, if yesterday you had gone there and clicked on Between the Lines newsletter, send it to me, you would have the links now on Sacred Thread.
Absolutely. And if you subscribe now, you can go back and look through MailChimp at some of our older editions, but also link to that newsletter that just went out on our Twitter account, Facebook account, Instagram, and on our Google platform as well. So you can click over to that newsletter anywhere on our social media page and go ahead and subscribe on our website at preservingbibletime.org. You'll never miss a newsletter or an announcement.
So what's next on the liturgical calendar for the Anglican Church?
Well, we're still plugging through Easter until the 24th, which is Pentecost. So this Sunday, I'll be looking at John 14. So in the liturgical calendar, we're looking at the readings are now in Acts and John, looking at some of the resurrection appearances. And we talked last week about some of the resurrection appearances of Jesus. So we'll be looking at that again. We'll be looking at some of Jesus's teachings in John 14 as being the way, the truth, and the life. And that'll be this Sunday. And also there is Acts as well, the early church and the founding of the early church, the establishment of the church after the resurrection and ascension of Jesus. But we'll go into Pentecost. We'll go to Ascension first, and then we'll go into Pentecost because Jesus ascends before he sends the Holy Spirit. So last week was the Good Shepherd Sunday, and we looked at Jesus being the good shepherd of the sheep. We looked at John 10, where Jesus said, I am the door of the sheep. He also says, I am the good shepherd. That's in contrast to the bad shepherds mentioned in Ezekiel 37 and Jeremiah 23. Jesus is aligning himself with King David, who is the great shepherd of the sheep under the last great king, the great king of the United Monarchy, Solomon, his son, being the last king of the United Monarchy. And so Jesus is aligning himself with King David. He's showing that he is a greater king and a greater shepherd than King David.
Let's do a bit of sheepology here. To explain the concept of the door to the sheepfold.
Yeah, so Jesus says, I am the door. This Sunday, we're going to be looking at John 14:6, where Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So this door is how you find pasture. So a good shepherd will bring his sheep into a sheep pen or sheepfold at night.
Envision like a half cave on a hillside that may be 20 or 30 feet wide and maybe 10, 15 feet deep. And take it from there.
Yeah, and so the sheep would be brought into this corral with a low rock wall, maybe 4 or 5 feet tall, and then the shepherd would put his body in the doorway. The shepherd would actually count his sheep, put his shepherding staff there. The sheep would jump over, or he would tap each sheep as they come in. He would count them, number them. He's got them named, they know his voice, and so he's doing a head count as he gets these sheep into the sheep pen, and there they will rest for the night. And then in the morning or the next day, when he takes them out to pasture, he moves them. And I love how I think it's the American Standard Version says it, that he drives them out. Because sheep aren't supposed to stay in the pen. That has implications.
But they have to be in the field. But another quirk of sheepology is that in those days, with the chief shepherd, they did know his voice. and he would
Yeah.
lead the flock from the front. If you see modern video of, say, Bedouin shepherds, they drive the flock from behind because they're
Yeah.
hired hands. They're not they're not shepherd number one. And
Mhm.
by remaining in the door, the opening to the sheepfold, he also protects those sheep against intruders at
Yeah.
night. So
Yeah.
they're safe. You've got to go through the chief shepherd to reach the flock.
And
So he,
so, yeah, the good shepherd will go out ahead, will care for, confront the danger. And you see all this in the 6 verses of Psalm 23. You see a beautiful poetic picture of the good shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He restores my soul. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my
yeah,
soul. He leads
tell
me.
me about still waters. What does that mean?
Well, again, sheep have a collection of wool under their necks that if they get too close to water and that wool droops down in the water, it can absorb it and the sheep can drown. The sheep are also afraid of
They fall
fast
over
moving
forward.
water.
They can't stay up. The weight of the water
Yeah,
will pull their heads in, and so they do not like moving water. In fact,
it's
in the
dangerous.
desert, if the shepherd finds a well and he has to pour water into a trough to feed the sheep, he has to turn the sheep around so they're facing in the other direction. Otherwise, they panic.
Yeah, yeah,
Still water
absolutely.
means just that, still standing water,
And
because of the
so that
nature of sheep. Yeah.
Yeah, because they have to drink. So you have to put them in a state where they're content to drink and they're safe to drink. So he leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness. These are well worn paths. And if you look at the mountainsides, you can see stripes, parallel stripes or paths where shepherds have led their sheep to graze in these pastures. Now, when we think pastures, we think like lush green fields, but these are not lush green fields. These are stones with a little bit of grass around them, but it does look more green than brown when the dew falls around the rocks and that grassy tufts will spring up around those stones. It does look more green than brown, but it's mainly desert.
Doug
And so
Greenwald
that
makes an
moisture.
interesting parallel with the phrase "the land of milk and honey," which is how God described to Moses where the people were going in. And it's not what you think. It's almost the opposite of what you'd think, because the land of milk means goats and sheep, which would be Judea, and the Negev down in the desert area where there's little pasture land, but it's good land if you know what you're doing for sheep and goats. The honey is the northern part of Israel, which became Israel in the divided kingdom days, and the area around Galilee where there are pastures. You don't have cows, for example, or
Right.
horses in
No.
the south because there's not grazing land for them. Up north, they can exist and persist. So there's the land, and bees and flowers and honey happen. So honey represents the north, milk represents the south.
And date palms, and there's date honey that is produced
Hmm.
as well in the land. So that yeah, when God tells Abraham, a shepherd of sheep, I'm going to give you a land flowing with milk and honey. It's from the north to the south, from Dan to Beersheba, and it is more green. And our rabbi Doug Greenwald would say that geography affects your God dependency. He said the North
Hmm.
was more idolatrous and prone to idolatry because they didn't feel like they needed God because they had an abundance, where the South was more brown, dry, and arid. And the people would depend on God more. So they were the last to fall, though they too
So
were
you could see how
idolatrous.
the people of the northern kingdom, Israel, would have drifted away from the core beliefs more easily than those in
Yeah.
the south. Geology has such it's an important part of context, isn't it?
Absolutely. The land speaks, as you know, a lot of my professors
Geology,
used to say.
geography, yeah.
Yeah, that the land is the fifth gospel. And the Isaiah scholars say no, Isaiah is the fifth gospel.
Mm.
but the point is the land speaks. So the land of the Bible speaks a lot of truth. If we ask ourselves, where are we geographically? Where are we topographically? Just even being next to the Mediterranean, that these, the dew coming off the Mediterranean that forms these, green pastures. So yeah, I mean,
You
this is
mentioned the
all.
Bible and the land. There's a video series that Preserving Bible Times did years ago, where
Oh, it's
they
great.
flew over the whole land of Israel to all the important biblical sites with narration.
Mm-hmm.
That's available for purchase on Preserving Bible Times. They did that in an era before it was politically impossible to do. You couldn't do that anymore without getting shot at, or at least
Yeah.
restricted by law and security. So
And
that
before
was
drones, that was helicopter footage.
yeah, it was a helicopter flight filming from the sky over all those biblical sites, and you'll find a wealth of information there to help furnish your context, your biblical context, at preservingbibletime.org. Robbie, I'm glad we made we came alive today on the morning show because you were available, and we're glad you were able to join us. And we'll look forward to next week. I know you got a busy schedule. I mean, you're a pastor and everything, so.
Trying to be.
Yeah, and a
Good to be
father,
with you,
4
Jim.
kids, a bike ministry. Robbie is about as busy as you can get. So we appreciate that. Pastor Robbie, again, the executive director of Preserving Bible Times, their website, preservingbibletime.org. Robbie, thank you so much. We'll see you in a week or so.
Thank you for having me on the Broken Road. A joy, a privilege, and a pleasure as always. Godspeed.